Okay, I want to go back. Left off last week, Rebecca. I want to go back where we left off last week on the chart before we get into the laws. We're learning the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros, difficult laws. So hold on, let's share. Okay, so the Eiruv Chatzeiros again is we have there's two concepts of Eruv. We have we have the laws that we learned until now. Hold on. Are you able to see me? Yeah. We have the laws until we learned until now, which are the idea of the public domain is you're not allowed to carry in a public domain, in a Rosh Hashanah, and a Carmelis, rabbinically, and a private domain, which is a Rosh Yachid, you can carry. Now, we all know the concept of an Eruv. An Eruv basically means when you have an Eruv in an area or even a city, is to turn the area or the city into a private domain, technically. That what seems to be a public domain is now a private domain. And therefore, if you could carry in a private domain, you could carry in the Eruv. Shlomo Melech added to that although you could carry in a private domain, let's say like on top over here, picture number, the chapter number 4, the first picture. This is 5 houses or 6 houses, right? Each door represents a house, and it's gated, so it has all the qualifications to make it private, the door and everything. And so in theory, this should be enough. This is a private space that's owned by the group. The problem is it's not a private domain. It's not someone's house. If this were to be someone's house, only one person, so then that's something else. That's your home. But it's a whole bunch of people living in this place. So in theory, it's like a larger space turned private. Although it's a private space and it's not even as open, so to say, as what would be Carmelis or something that is more open that gets closed in. This is just a courtyard, like called a chatzir. So Shlomo Melech didn't want that people could live in a chatzir, in a courtyard, and will never know the ideas of Shabbos because they never lived in a space where there was public and private, and they're always carrying from house to house, seemingly different private individuals, private properties, although they have a shared property, which is the courtyard, and would be forgotten the whole idea of Shabbos. So he wanted to make a simon, a sign. The sign is that every week, or making sure that that's where they use Eiruv Chatzeiros, they would use matzahs even today, is to because the matzahs are last longer than bread. Bread lasts so long, and matzahs could last almost a year. You could have a matzah in a plastic bag. So matzahs, you take food and you put it together, and everyone would participate in this food, and then that would kind of unite the chatzir, the people living in the courtyard. And this would make it kind of not just a bunch of private people that live in a courtyard that have each one their own use of the courtyard, but now they become like a group. So if you would have, let's say, a community kitchen, would be the quintessential idea of a Eiruv Chatzeiros. Like we said, the story of the Rebbe's father, who said a sukkah. If you make a sukkah that everyone could eat out of, that itself is the Eiruv Chatzeiros, because you're uniting everyone. Now we're going to learn throughout the laws of there's the chatzir. So I think we're holding over here. So let's just go from the second picture, the small pictures. This is based on the introduction of the Kitzur Shulchan, and then we're going to get to the laws. See, whenever I try to get started, someone tries to get in, and then it messes up the whole situation. Let's see if I could figure this out. Let him in without disconnecting everything. No, I'm not gonna be so lucky. Hold on. Okay, let's do this again. Hold on. Okay. So we're holding on to the second picture. Sometimes courtyards were joining each other, having only one exit to the street, as illustrated, one exit for both joint chatzeiros. And sometimes each courtyard had its own exit to the street, there are halachas of Eiruv pertaining to such situations. So in a little situation basically is if you have, and this is also, again, like I said, literally, it's not a concept. I mean, first of all, any gated area is a chutzner. If you go to Seattle on 75th and 75th and in the North End, that's a gated golf course. It's gated. It's literally surrounded by a gate, and people live there. That's a chutzner. And everyone has public use of the public place. If that was a Jewish place, you could make a Eiruv Chatzeiros there. You'd have to make an Eiruv. If a few Jews live there and you want to carry, you have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. With all the laws we're going to learn, if the Chatzer has Jews and Gentiles living in it. But you have also sometimes where the Chatzeiros are joined to each other. There's one after the next, like over here, literally. So if I walk down the street, cross the street, I'm going to be going to daven in a Chatzer right after we finish this class. Right after that Chatzer is an alleyway. And after that alleyway starts another Chatzer, another courtyard. And I think there's 3-4 courtyards, one after the next, with little alleyways. It means the cars can't go there, only people. And that's similar to what we have over here. So then you have laws, how do you join these together? Or if they can join together. You have sometimes each courtyard has its own exit to the street, which here would show that they're separate from each other. Okay, so then you have another case over here, so now about the picture wants to show us about a mavri. A mavri is similar to what I said, not 100%, but similar to what I said, what we have down the street. So we have Bati Rand, and after Bati Rand, I forget the next name of the other houses. So there's an alleyway in between. Now, there's a way to make that alleyway also into a roof. If you see at the end of this picture, there's a little bit of a overtop. What is it called? Let's say a beam that crosses over the alley, with these little two parts of the wall. The alley sometimes would have a door, sometimes they wouldn't have a door. There's a difference between what's called a mavir mefulish or non-mefulish. If it's open from both sides, it means people could just walk through the alley like we have down the road from me, which means it's not closed off from one side. Because if you had a dead end, let's say on this side, so then it's much less traffic, obviously. The only person would come into the alley is someone who would have a need to go into one of the various Chatzeiros. So if you look at this picture a little slowly, we have here, let's say each one of these are two Chatzers, two courtyards going into a single alley. If this is to be an open alley from both ends, I mean people could cross through, like we have downstairs. So then it's one law. If the alley is closed in the back, it's not mefulish. So then it's easier to privatize the alley by having to do less simanim signs that would kind of close up one of the entrances of the alleys. But in this case, let's say this alley is closed in the back, where we're standing over here, where my arrow's over here. So you make, this is an extreme. They did two sides, if you see, two sides with a beam on top. That's like if you really have to close it up. But if you have it closed in the back, you wouldn't have to do so much. And that would privatize the alley, and now the courtyards could use the alley and use the courtyards to each other, to go into each other, carry into each other, and use the alley. So what do you have to do in such a situation? So you have two Eiruv Chatzeiros. You have the Eiruv Chatzeiros that do each Chatzer separately, and on top of that, they would do together all the courtyards. We'll do a second one, and we'll learn there's different names for these, to unite the alleyway, the whole picture over here, that comes one private domain, which is really what an Eiruv is, right? An Eiruv is a whole bunch of courtyards, a whole bunch of houses, that comes. So this is what we're doing if we have in Brooklyn, if we have in Yerushalayim, an Eiruv. So when the halacha refers to an alley, it denotes an area into which two or more courtyards exit into the alley, and from the alley they can exit to the main space, to the Rosh Hashanah. See illustration. Okay. Now in the alley we have what's called a shituf. You see this nice picture over here. All the people get together. Each of these people are representing another one of the courtyards. Means they're the Vadim Masadir. They are the representatives of each of one of their courtyards, right? They're part of they're the head of their community list, and they get together and make a shituf. Shituf is in the word a partnership. So they make a partnership and say, you know what? Although we each have our own courtyards, but because we have this alley and we want to privatize the alley, we want to make the whole into a private domain. So then we have to make a second food, which is called a shituf. Again, with the halachas of, again, if after the alley you go into a Carmelis or to a Breshus Rabbim, so you have to close up according to the halachas, like we have over here, the beam or the sides, depending on how the alley is And if it's open both ways, depending on what you have to do to close up the alley. Means do you have to do two side things, a beam on top? All those are questions depending on what type of alley it is. So in order to carry in the alley, many requirements must be fulfilled. The halachas are complex and not discussed in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so we're not going to learn this in Kitzur of how to privatize the alley, which is also in a bigger picture privatizing a city. However, a mention is made of partnership in the alley. This is achieved when all inhabitants of the courtyard that exit into the alley jointly make a special Eiruv, the details of which are not discussed in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but at times we'll refer to in the footnotes, which is the shituf that they make for the courtyards together with the alley to privatize that whole area. Okay, so this gives us a picture of what we're going to learn about. Now let's go back to the laws because we have a lot of questions. These are complex issues because it affects every one of us if we live in anything that has some sort of Eiruv that we have to deal with. We're going to go into, for instance, let's say over here. I'm not going to go into them yet. We have over here, for instance, the Rav. They have a question. But let's just look at it for a second because no point in learning the halachas if we're not understanding what we're talking about. So let's see over here. We're not going to do this whole thing, but so here's the question. The question is, evidently, it's a true question. So it says, okay. So it says like this. Let's see if I could get this. It says, I live in an apartment. I live in an apartment building in Crown Heights, and we are the ones who perform the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Meaning to say, we're going to learn these laws is, for instance, you have the Eiruv Chatzeiros, and you also have the let's say not every building in Crown Heights has only Jews in it. You have Gentiles also. So we're going to learn the laws of what happens if Gentiles are in the building. How do they affect the Eiruv Chatzeiros? But let's say whenever they worked it out, like according to the laws we're going to learn, and we have one of them who performs Eiruv Chatzeiros for the residents of the building. And matzah, like I said, the food used is matzah traditionally because it's hamotzi, which is for Shabbos makes it a meal, but also it sustains itself. It preserves itself better than bread. You'd have to change the bread all the time because you could use the same Eiruv weekly. So the matzah used in the Eiruv is kept in my apartment. The idea is that you have a place, but let's see the question. My question is, when I go away for Shabbos, does the Eiruv still function properly for the rest of the building? Why? What's the question? Because if you have the Eiruv in the person's apartment and the person locks their apartment and leaves, no one has access to the apartment. So it's like having an Eiruv Chatzeiros in a place you have no access to. The whole point is to make like a joint space where everyone's going to eat. No one can eat. The food is locked up. Do I need to leave a key with someone so that my apartment remains accessible in theory? Obviously, no one's going to sit down and eat the meal, but it has to be at least theoretically possible for them to enter. So the question he's asking is, does he have to leave the key for someone so in theory they could get in? And what if someone else is staying in my apartment while I'm away? Does this change anything? Now, I'm just going to read the answer, but the reason I bring this question up is because we see something very clear. This is a question. I don't know when it was asked, but it's a question. Even it means you see that even let's say in Brooklyn, if you live in today, this is something that's not a theory. This is a concept. If you live in a building and there's no Eiruv, the question is what happens if there's an Eiruv in the city. So if there's an Eiruv in the city, then or an Eiruv in the whole area, then whoever is running the Eiruv is kind of making an Eiruv Chatzeiros as well. But this is not something that has to be taken lightly. So if you're traveling, let's say away for Shabbos, you're going to a place for Shabbos, and there's questions about it. Let's say you're staying in a hotel, and you're a whole bunch of people. One staying in a hotel, you want to go from room to room and carry stuff. You have to find out the halachas. Obviously, we have to check into all the laws of what does it mean if you're temporary, you're only there staying temporarily. How does that affect? If it's one owner in a hotel that they have access to it. There's all these laws that what kind of ownership does a person have to a hotel room, the person who rents the room, and what kind of ownership does the owner of the hotel retain of your room? It could be that the very fact that you're just like a guest in his or her hotel, and they could go in and out, and they own the furniture and everything, and they could take things from your room that belong to them, like let's say their lamp or something. So does that affect that it's really one building and therefore it's not a whole bunch of apartments? These are all questions that are asked. But let's just see the answer of this question. If you're a Rosh Shabbos and your home will be empty, you should leave a key, which means no one's there. You should leave a key with a neighbor or someone in the building so the Eiruv Chatzeiros food in your apartment remains accessible. Nevertheless, if you are home for Shabbos and are simply going to be away from your house during this is a printing mistake, Ben Hashmashas means as Shabbos comes in, because usually what happens is the law is how we enter into Shabbos. We've learned this about other laws, about muksa, etc. How we enter into Shabbos is how Shabbos is, meaning when something enters into Shabbos at a certain status, then even if you leave, you don't have to be in your house 24/7, so people could come into your apartment. If when Shabbos entered your home, so then then there's an air of everything's good, even if you leave the house and no one has access to the food for a few hours. But he says even if you're there for Shabbos, but you're not going to be in your building during Hashmashas as Shabbos comes in, of the entrance of Shabbos, such as if the family has gone to shul, let's say, then there is no need to leave the key with somebody else. Practically, in order not to forget, it's proper when a person makes an Eiruv Chatzeiros for him to initially leave a key with the neighbor to cover the eventuality that they may one day go away for Shabbos. In the event that they already left for Shabbos and the key was not left with the neighbor, hence leaving them without access to the Eiruv Chatzeiros food, the neighbors should make a new Eiruv Chatzeiros for the Shabbos without a blessing, unless access to the Eruv is verified with the owner, such as through an unlocked window. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the laws because this is when we get back to this when we have to learn the laws. But what we're seeing from this, hold on, Aaron. What we're seeing from this is that the Eiruv Chatzeiros is something that's serious and applicable to our times today, and it affects how we have access to moving things within our apartment. You see here, this is Courtyards. Obviously, this family in Courtyards, or the people in their building, are assuming there is no Eruv outside of their building. So they have to have access to the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Better to leave a key or leave a window open, what have you. But just the idea is showing that this is something that's real, that has to be available for people to get to the food. That unites everyone and makes the building a place that you could carry. Yes, Aaron?
Okay, I'm going to mention two things. One, my rabbi said, because we were studying the laws through Flatbush, Brooklyn, because there's problems. Half the people don't believe in it, half the people believe in it, whatever. But he said, so like brownstones, it's one continuous building, and you just put a stick. This is point one. You put a stick at one end and you put a stick at the other. Everyone agrees. And then you can go to each other's houses and pass food around. Second is that I see this a lot, Ocean Parkway. So someone who doesn't believe that there's an Eruv, so what they'll do is from their driveways and their house door, so that their kids can bring stuff and play, or people can come, they put a stick and they put string. How does this? Why can't you do it for this?
Let me explain. Let me again explain you something. Back to the picture over here, right? The stick that you're talking about is where there's a street, a sidewalk, which is like a Carmelis, which is open to the public, and you're trying to privatize that area. You're making it into like an alleyway or something, right? So
we don't see the picture. It's just a white screen.
I know it's because my computer will do that when I need
no problem.
Here we go.
So
here we go. So over here, right? You don't need a stick in this picture, the top picture, right? Because there's a wall everywhere, right? Nevertheless, we're not talking about turning an Eruv of making the open space or the sidewalk, like you said, the brownstone, into a place that you could carry. That's an Eruv for carrying. We're talking even in a place where there's walls, there's 4 walls, and there's a courtyard, which has 5 people living there that go into the courtyard. There has to be Shlomo Melech made that you have to. The rabbis made that you have to remind ourselves that there is such a concept of carrying on Shabbos, although this is a private domain, it's totally walled in. There's 4 walls with the door. Nevertheless, you have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros so people can remember that this is Shabbos, and the only reason we're allowed to carry is because we made this into private domain. Why? Because at the end of the day, everyone has their own house. Just because you live in a courtyard doesn't give you right to go into my house.
Let me ask you this. The one with the alleyway in the middle
is making an Eruv. Here, talking about even if you don't need an Eruv, technically you have a wall. Nevertheless, you still have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. That's a separate thing.
So Eruv is where you give a loaf of bread, a challah.
That's the food. That's to unite the courtyard. Chatzeiros means a courtyard. To unite the courtyard, to make it that we're not, although we all have our own privacy, the very fact that everyone has access to the courtyard. So there is already some, like you said before, the fact that who said it before that Rebecca, you said last week. Because everyone's using the courtyard, therefore the rabbi said it's a Chatzeiros. Every courtyard you're allowed to use the courtyard. The point is, even though you have communal use, you have to have some food that makes it more than just your typical. I could sit down in the lobby and read a book. So the question is really, how does it work when there's let's say Yerushalayim. Let's just take Yerushalayim for an example. Yerushalayim has an Eruv, even the Eiruv Chatzeiros, even the Eiruvei has an Eruv, meaning the most extreme rabbinic court has an Eruv in parts of Yerushalayim, right? Let's say in the Geula area, it's an Eruv of the Eiruvei, which is considered like the top court, let's say. So there's an Eruv, it's a huge amount of space. It's a few square miles. Nevertheless, the Eiruv Chatzeiros of Eiruvei, if I'm not mistaken, goes all the way to Ramban Street in Rechavia. So it goes from Rechavia, it's probably all the way to Ramat Shlomo, not into Ramat Shlomo, but all the way, including where your daughter is, Aaron, in Ramat Ashkol. That's a 7-kilometer walk from where I'm sitting now, and I would be right now in the Eruv of the Eiruvei. So that we have to assume that aside from just having all the halachic strings and poles and all the things that would make it a private domain as if there's a wall, they also have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros and a Shituf. They have to do all the food things that would make it. Otherwise, each building still has to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Now, notwithstanding that they're, like in the case of the alleyway, right? The alleyway has all the qualifications to privatize it technically. But even though each courtyard has their own courtyard, they have to make a separate Eiruv Chatzeiros in the courtyards and a Shituf, a combination, a partnership in the alley as well. So the very fact that we don't see that people are doing Eiruv Chatzeiros in their private apartment buildings there has to be based on the fact that there's something that the rabbis are doing that are covering everyone in the Eiruv Chatzeiros and the Shituf. It's not enough just to have walls and strings and poles. Okay, let's just do quickly over here the footnotes, and we're going to go to the halacha. Okay, we're still in the halacha inside. Shnei Yisrael, if there's two Jews, or Yisrael more than two. Why two? Because if it's one person, it's one person. If that courtyard is my own private home, I have a little apartment, it's my own home, then it's not. I don't need an Eruv. Why? Because it's my private place. But here we're talking about two people have two homes, or Yisrael more than two homes. Hadar mechatzer echad that live in a single courtyard. Each person has their own house, own room, like in the picture illustrated before. And again, you don't have access to the house. This means it's not an open house where you could just walk into my house. Also, you have a house like the picture that's walled in. Two Jews live there. Two families live there in this courtyard. You cannot carry from the courtyard to the house or from the house to the courtyard. Even if you don't have the courtyard, meaning, let's say, what's that mean? Let's say you have like Aaron said before, you have the houses that are one next to the next. What are they called? The brownstones, right? And they have windows in between.
Yes.
Without going through the courtyard. So let's say, for instance, that's an example, very, very, very often in Brooklyn. You walk out of your brownstone and you have a little bit of a porch, and the next person has their brownstone on their porch, and then you would go from there down the porch into the chutzner. You can't even pass from porch to porch, or from even if you had a window in between the apartments. Even if there was a window that was just privately and that made a private entrance from your living room to their living room. Let's say that existed, right? It's not normal for people to have that, but let's say they did. A certain talto dersham you can't carry from there, even though not going through the courtyard. Look at the Magen Avram, Siman Shin Samach Vav, Sif Katan, U'mitzvah leim lasis Eiruv Chatzeiros shelo yavil dei kishol. And therefore, the only way to make this permissible, that we could carry from apartment to apartment through the courtyards, not through the courtyards, i.e. privatizing properly the entire courtyard, is you have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. An Eiruv Chatzeiros means a courtyard Eiruv. Okay, let's see the introductory remarks of chapter. It's basically what we saw in the picture. I'll quickly review. Houses usually were arranged back in the day. Again, till today, there's such a thing. In this fashion, with endless variations throughout these halachas, when reference is made to people living in a courtyard, it means people living in houses that open to a courtyard, like in the pictures we showed. In order to carry from the houses to the courtyard, all residents had to join in making an Eiruv. You have to make an Eiruv. This Eiruv is made up of poles and strings, but of food. This biblical ordinance instituted by King Solomon and his court. Shlomo Melech made that you would have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Sometimes courtyards were joining each other, having only one exit to the street, as illustrated. Again, this illustration we don't have, but it's the pictures that I showed up on top. And sometimes each courtyard had its own exit to the street. There are halachas of Eiruv pertaining to such situations. When the halacha refers to an alley, it denotes an area in which two or more courtyards exist going into the alley. All the pictures we showed before. In order to carry in the alley, so we have the courtyards. It's not enough to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros in the courtyard that permits a person to carry in the courtyards, but how could all the courtyards that join into an alley carry between each other and into the alley? So it donates an area into two or more courtyards existing. In order to carry in the alley, many requirements must be fulfilled. The halachos are complex and not discussed in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. However, mention is made of partnership, which is the shituf in the alley. This is achieved when all inhabitants of the courtyards that exist into the alley jointly make a special Eiruv separate from the Eiruv Chatzeiros, the details of which are not discussed in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but at times will be referred to in the footnotes. Okay, that's why we're mentioning it. All right, let's see the footnotes now. Footnote number 1. It's forbidden to carry. The rabbinic decree enacted by King Solomon's court, for fear that a person will carry out from a private domain to public domain. The things like this. This happens, by the way, today. It's less common because an Eiruv is more common. When I was a child growing up, it was not common to have an Eiruv. I mean, I remember when they put up the Eiruv in Los Angeles, it was a big deal. London, still today, there's a big fight about the Eiruv in Golders Green in that area. They were against the Eiruv, even though the Eidech Haredis made the Eiruv. Brooklyn, no one had a Eiruv in Brooklyn. And when I was growing up, again, Moshe Feinstein was very against the idea of an Eiruv in Brooklyn. I'm not going to get into the rabbinic why they did it, how they did it, what have you. But Eiruv in big areas was not common in the United States. It was something that was common in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, they had Eiruv. So a lot of times you would have guests that would come for Shabbos to Eretz Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael to Seattle. And my father would always remind them, and sometimes he'd forget that they'd be carrying. Why? Because the whole idea of carrying or not carrying on Shabbos was a foreign concept. Because all the large cities have an Eiruv. You go to Tanya, you go to Haifa, you go to Tel Aviv, they all have an Eiruv. And then, so if there's never anything to remind us of the laws of Shabbos about carrying, it can end up being a situation where you just go out of the Eiruv. Or you're in a city that doesn't have an Eiruv and you forget about all the laws. Even in Tel Aviv or in other cities on the beach, the Eiruv doesn't go, it goes up to a certain point. If you want to take a stroll on the beach, you can't just carry on the beach. The beach doesn't have an Eiruv. If you go to Netanya, you'll see that the Eiruv finishes on the hill on top of the beach, I think. And then you have all that space, but you can't just carry. So if people are not going to be familiar with the laws of carrying because there's nothing to remind them about the laws of carrying, Shlomo Melech was concerned, this is many years ago, right? This is the time, beginning of the first temple, that people are going to forget the laws of Shabbos, so therefore he instituted that to remind everyone, notwithstanding, even if you have a walled area, it's a courtyard, it's private, no one has access to it, you need a special code to get through the door, it doesn't make a difference. Like an apartment building, just because the apartment door is locked doesn't make it free of an Eiruv Chatzeiros. It's a private domain, but still needs an Eiruv Chatzeiros. He says, Meseches Eruvin. There's a whole tractate about this. Rambam, Eruvin, the Bach, which we learned about, Rav Haigon, etc. Footnote number 2. What are we talking about here? There's also from house to house, the courtyard. You can't carry from the courtyards into the houses. And house to courtyard. There's two things over here. There's carrying between the houses each other, and there's carrying in the courtyards and from the courtyards to the house. A common application of this rule is that it's forbidden to carry from your apartment into the hall of the apartment building if there's another Jew living at that building, unless you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Straight up. You live in Manhattan, and it's very unlikely that there's not another Jew living in an apartment building in Manhattan. If everyone is a Gentile, there's different laws. Then the halacha considers it as if you're the only person in the building. We're not going to. These are the laws of Eiruvei. They're very technical laws, but chances are, in most places, there's other people living in the building that are Jews. Especially you go to Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Manhattan. So then, straight up, if there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros, you can't go outside. You can't take things from your apartment to the hallway. That's just the basic idea. Number 3, even if there's a window between houses, okay, actually, it's not so crazy in Brooklyn. There's ways for that to work. Even through a non-Jew, except for a mitzvah for the indispensable Shabbos needs. Okay, so the Avakas Rachel says that even a non-Jew can't carry for you from one window to the next. Okay. Number 4 is what we're talking about, is a mitzvah for them to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros so that they shall not fall into transgression. In other words, of carrying from a private domain to public domain. Okay. Meaning to like this, the language of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a mitzvah l'ma'aseh Eiruv Chatzeiros shelo yaveh nichshol. So he's saying over here, the footnotes, maybe it should have been more clear. It says you should make an Eiruv Chatzeiros so that they do not fall into transgression. In other words, of carrying from a private domain to a public domain. He's jumping. He's missing a piece. Meaning to say, even though you're not in a private domain, you have to make the Eiruv Chatzeiros, so you shouldn't be mikshal in carrying in the chatzir. But also that because the reason why you have an Eiruv Chatzeiros is so you shouldn't fall into the transgression of carrying outside the courtyard. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, well, we were studying it, and we were studying Feinstein's, but that's what the problems were. But anyways, as I remember, maybe I remember wrong, but if there was, say you have a brownstones, and in the middle there's a non-Jew, you could just politely ask them, "Do you mind if we put these 2 sticks, and will you accept?" And if they say yes, then it should be okay.
Yeah, Aaron, I need you to separate the 2 sticks from the Eiruv Chatzeiros. It's not the same thing.
Okay, but let me just ask you, an Eiruv Chatzeiros isn't it? Okay, I'll separate them. So
Yeah, but-
if there's a Gentile, one Gentile, you could ask him, can't you?
And let me. You need. I think you're not getting the thing over here. There's basically, imagine. Let's just forget the sticks. Imagine you came with a cement truck, and you wanted to build a wall that would connect all the apartments together. That would lock in the apartments, the open space in front of the apartments to make it a private entry, right? You wanted to make it a courtyard. So of course you would have to speak to your Gentile neighbors and your Jewish neighbors for that matter if you want to do that. If you want to do that, still doesn't get rid of the problem of the Eiruv Chatzeiros. What you're trying to talk about is making an Eiruv, putting the sticks to make an Eiruv that it's a private domain. Even if it's a private domain with a wall, forget the sticks. Even if you put a wall like in the first picture, you still need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. An Eiruv Chatzeiros is what Shlomo Melech added to the Eiruv. It means Eiruv makes it from a non-private domain. I say non-private because it doesn't have to be a halachically public domain. We're talking about a Carmelis, to make it from a Carmelis to a Shus Yachid, to a private domain. But even if it's a private domain, literally with a wall, it's a walled-in courtyard. So no one's arguing it's a private domain. You live in a golf course. You live in a gated area, right? The definition of a gated area is like the word, a gated area. So it's locked in. It still doesn't have anything to do with an Eiruv Chatzeiros. On top of that, Shlomo Melech says you have to do the food thing. It's 2 separate Eiruvs. 2 separate Eiruvim. You understand? So you're talking.
I understand. I thought you could bypass that by making it totally private.
No, but that's the whole point. The whole Eiruv Chatzeiros is when it is totally private.
I got you.
Apartment building, right? An apartment building, 99% of the time is a closed space. You have a door. If the door is closed, you can't get in. Means it's closed in. It's definitely closed in enough to call it a private domain. Notwithstanding, you still need to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. An Eiruv Chatzeiros is on top of the private domain. It's 100% private. You still have to. You're talking about making it a private domain. That's a separate question. That's a general Eiruv. Okay. Law number 2. If you have 2 courtyards, Yesh B'Noam Pesach. Okay, so again, these are. If everyone remembers the pictures that we looked. So we have two private courtyards that have a door that opens from one courtyard to the next without going through an alleyway. Okay? What does that mean? The question is that, the laws of Eiruvim are very complex. All these laws of how the chutzner is and how the courtyard is and how the opening is and how accessible is the opening and what made the opening, was it an official opening or the wall fell down? These are all questions. But let's just say the simple situation. Like in the picture, there's two courtyards that have a wall, a door, to go from one courtyard to the next. What does that really technically mean if that door is unlocked? Or most of the time it's unlocked? It's one courtyard. It just happens to be that there's a wall kind of separating the courtyards. Why would you do that? Whatever the reason is. To know that this is my courtyard, this is your courtyard, doesn't mean that we don't have access. We have access to each other's courtyard. Literally, if I were to go downstairs today and take a picture of the courtyard that I'm going to go daven in, it's pretty much a closed place. It has the walls are built by the houses. It has a little metal door. It has a mikvah. It has a courtyard. The kids are running around. It's a safe space. Everyone's apartments go into the courtyard. That's upstairs, downstairs. This is a regular thing in Yerushalayim. So that's how they built Jerusalem, with courtyards. So, but now, if you have a door that goes from one courtyard to the next, basically making it one courtyard. Why do you have the wall? Is because obviously there's certain reasons why we want to separate. But does the door make it enough of a situation that the courtyards can make it as one courtyard, and therefore you can make one Eiruv Chatzeiros for both courtyards? That's the question, right? So you have two courtyards that have walls, but between the walls have a door, not a tiny door, a door that halachically means that people can go in and out from each other's courtyard. If they want, that each person makes their own Eruv. So we have a door. The door doesn't mean it's automatically one chatzir. They can decide to say, no, we want to make our own Eruv, and you make your own Eruv. Each one carries in their own chatzir. But if you do a separate Eruv, you can't carry from one chatzir, from one courtyard to the next courtyard, vessels that were in the home. So this is what we're starting to learn about. What he's topping on is the next step of complexion of the complexity of the law. Let's say you have dishes. So you have dishes in your house. That's in your house. Even if you have a courtyard, that's your dishes in your house. That the point of a courtyard is that there's different levels of privacy. That's what we're dealing with, and those different levels of privacy affect how we view this group of people that live together. So if just because I live in a courtyard, that I leave my bicycle in the courtyard, or I leave my armchair and my book in the courtyard, and other courtyard garden things that I leave in the courtyard, and I feel comfortable leaving it there. And I may not even be so careful if I caught someone sitting in my chair or reading my book because it's kind of a public space. That still doesn't mean that my dishes in my house are also public. Just because I live in a courtyard, if I were to find my neighbor in my house taking out my dishes because she's short of a few plates, I'd be like, what are you doing? This is my dishes, my house. What are you doing in my house? So, right? So even though we have a courtyard, which the courtyard breaks certain boundaries of privacy, but the things that are in my house are still private. So therefore, the question is, vessels that were kept in the house are not the same thing as vessels or things that were kept in the courtyard. To take a bike from one courtyard to the next, if there's a door, it's different than to take my dishes from one courtyard to the next. That's what he's pointing out here. So let's say you have a door, and nevertheless you make separate Eiruv Chatzeiros. Courtyard A and courtyard B make their own separate Eiruv Chatzeiros, right? One is, we pay separate fees for each other's groups, whatever it is, we separate everything. We want to make our own Eiruv Chatzeiros. So if that's the case, vessels from the house that were stayed in the house, and they're private vessels from your house, you can't take them into the next courtyard because there's two levels of privacy that you're breaking. One level is your private house to the courtyard, and from your courtyard to the next courtyard. But if you want, you could choose otherwise. To make one Eruv, both chatzers, because you have a door, And then then you could take your dishes to the next courtyard or the next someone else's house in the courtyard, because now it's like one big courtyard. The door makes it one big courtyard, and just like you're allowed to bring your dishes to the courtyard, you're allowed to bring your dishes to the courtyard and the other courtyard, and to the other person's house in the courtyard. So by making one Eruv, you get rid of the second level of privacy. If you make two Eruvs, each courtyard makes their own Eruv, even though they can make one because they have a door. So you've built two levels of privacy from your home. You have your home, your courtyard, and the next courtyard. But if both courtyards make together an Eruv, it's only one privacy, your home to the courtyard. Okay. So then if you make one Eruv between the two courtyards, then you can carry the dishes from your house into the courtyard, etc. Let's say the courtyards have only a window that makes access between the courtyards, not a door. That's 4 by 4 fists. Let's say 9 by 9 inches or so, or 10 by 10 inches, square 10 inches of window space, which is enough space to pass things between the window. And it's not too high. It's not like a sky window that, there's no access to it. It's within waist. 10 tvachim is about 30 inches from the ground. So it's with, we know that lamata mesar tvachim means that's the space. So it's in the space of access. And there's no gates that block the window. If you put up what do they call them? Security gates. That you don't want the kids from the other courtyard to climb through the entrance. So that doesn't help just because there's a window. But if there's a gate there, then that there's no more. You don't need more than the gate to show that you don't have any connection to each other. Then you can still make an error. So you don't need a door. A window is enough. A window of 10 inches by 10 inches, 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim. That's below, at least starting below 10 tvachim from the ground. Then that's enough of a window, and there's no gate in the window. You didn't put up a security gate by the window. So then it's a serious opening that could be passed, and you decide to make a single eruv. Then you have a single courtyard, and you could take things from your home into the courtyard to the next courtyard. But if the window is less than that, then it's just a small little entry. It's just like a little tube. And it's too little space, and you can't make a united Eruv. And therefore, each courtyard has their own Eruv, and you can't, and obviously you can't pass things between. He says that if there's a window between houses and you want to make the houses together, an Eiruv Chatzeiros, then it's okay to have more than 10 tefachim high. Let's say your window that between the houses is on top of the ceiling. It's not such a problem because the house is like it's filled up. Meaning, a house is like there's a lot of things in your house. You can have a bunk bed, and there's an entrance on top of the bunk bed between the next person's bunk bed. You could pass things. The kids could pass things. So that's enough of an entry. A home is not the same as a courtyard, but if it's too high by a courtyard, then it's not a kosher space to make it one. I mean, kosher means it's not considered accessible between the courtyards. Again, this is a complex laws. Please cut in if you have any questions or if you're not visualizing what we're talking about. Okay, let's do the footnotes here. What does it have to do with Shabbos begins? It says permitted to carry into their own courtyard, but the vessels that were in the house before Shabbos began. But vessels that were in the court, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about the bicycle. Let's say the simple case. You have two courtyards with a door in between, right? And you have your bicycle. Could the kids take the bicycle from one courtyard to the next if they play together? Or could you take your book and walk into the next courtyard and continue reading or talking? We just talked about the vessels in the house. What about the vessels in the courtyard? So the vessels that were in the court at the beginning of Shabbos may be carried from one court unto the next. The Mishnah Berurah says even if you didn't make one Eiruv Chatzeiros, you made two separate ones because it's only one level of privacy. Your home, your courtyard to the next courtyard. But the things that are in your home has to go through your from your house to the courtyard, from your courtyard to the next courtyard. Now, again, what happens if one courtyard makes an Eruv Chatzeiros and the other one does not? Then you can't carry from your courtyard to the next one, right? And again, it may seem like whatever. Again, in Jerusalem, this is a common situation. But if you think about it, there's a lot of cases that are similar. You have a lot of apartment buildings, right? You know, apartment A, apartment B, apartment C. Those are pretty much considered two chatzeros, right? You have sometimes like if you go to like, Brooklyn, you have it a lot, right? You go to Long Island, to Coney Island over there, right? All those buildings, building A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So you have all these buildings, you know. Are those considered separate courtyards? Most probably. And they could have access to each other that you could kind of go from one courtyard to the next or one space to the next. So how does that work? Is each building its own building, or is it one building? You know, they have the same address, but they're, you know, again, there could be 5 blocks of buildings, you know, in these big you know, complexes. Okay. 6. What are you talking about? Then you can't carry the vessels from one courtyard to the next from your home. If you did take out an article from the house to the court without an Eiruv, you may not move the article 4 Amos in the court. See Mishnah Berurah and the Be'er Halacha. He's not talking about specifically, but he means to say, when if you took it out from your house into a courtyard that there's no Eiruv, then now that item that's in the courtyard from your house is as if it's in a public domain. You can't move it more than 4 cubic amos. Okay. So it means if you took a book out of your house in an apartment building that has no Eiruv, so again, there's a difference between the items that are in the courtyard and the items that are in the house. Even the halacha kind of is that, let's say the bicycle in the courtyard, that's different. Those, it means things that are in your outside is to carry in. See, this is maybe Barbara, Rebecca. I don't remind you. You told me that your Rav told you that open space is permitted. You don't need no Chatzeiros.
Yeah, he was saying that it's understood that when you rent an apartment here, you're not just renting the actual apartment, but you're also renting like the hallway and the laundry room and whatever. Like, so he said it's not necessary.
Okay, again, I think that in the places like Manhattan, the Rabbanim are doing an Eruv Chatzeiros or the Shituf that are allowing people to carry. I'm still not clear
Yeah,
100.
I just made a note to myself to ask a few Rabbanim tomorrow what they have to say about this topic.
I would like to hear, because it seems like that you would still need to make a private Eruv Chatzeiros, even though we don't find that the custom. I don't, at least in my building in Jerusalem, I've never been in a building in Jerusalem where they had some, unless there's someone's making it on our behalf. But another thing would be that I just wanted to point out that there's maybe what he was talking about. There's a difference between things that are left in the courtyard, means in your hallways. You have a lot of people have things that are in their hallways. Let's say things that are in the public space, that the vessels that stay in the public space. For those things, you don't even know if Chatzeiros. To move the bicycle around in a courtyard is not a problem. The problem is, or to move your lawn chair, that's not a problem. The problem is to take your dishes or your things that are in your house into the courtyard. And if you take it in, you can't move it around. So, like for instance, I mean, just that's something very simple. Garbage. Like, you know, how could you take? I mean, the garbage is not. I mean, to take your garbage that you've accumulated over Shabbos to the public garbage drop through the courtyard is not so simple.
I asked a Shaila about that. I asked a few Rabbanim and they told
Well,
me there's a garbage room on my floor and they said that I'm not allowed to bring recycling out to that room on Shabbos, but that I can bring the garbage
why?
to that room.
Why?
I can't remember exactly why, but it has something to do with the fact that
It's
I
garbage.
yeah, and that it would be like not befitting for Shabbos to have garbage like in your apartment.
Also could be because what we're talking about is kalim. To take vessels, but like you said,
Yeah, garbage is like not, it's like waste. It's not.
yeah, Aaron. Yes, Aaron.
Hold on. Yeah. Okay. 2 things. My rabbi friend, he teaches in the yeshiva and runs a children's service. He said, okay, so 2 examples. So there, you got 2 houses, they share a driveway. You go in, one goes to the left, one goes to the right. Okay, so on Sukkot, they all share the back. It kind of like melts together. So they got all their sukkahs out there. So he rented from this guy. So he makes him a challah, and then he can carry, and everyone I think makes a challah for themselves, so they can carry in and out to their sukkah between these two houses and use the driveway. Number two is
That's
I
that is
what?
what they're doing is an Eiruv Chatzeiros.
Okay. Then about the trash.
I just want to point out that's your classic case. What's the problem there? That your dishes are in your house, and so
Right.
you're trying to bring your dishes into the sukkah. But again, the sukkah itself is an Erev Chatzeres. To bring one challah for yourself is not going to help the problem. You have to. The point is to make a joint thing. If you just to say to make your own Erev Chatzeres that doesn't include the next person, that's not an Erev Chatzeres. The whole
I
point
don't
of
know the whole shebang on how they do it, but he says he has to make challahs for the owner.
Okay, and
And I don't know, do they say a prayer? He didn't give it all the details. He just says we.
we'll get to the bracha. There's a bracha that's made on Erev Chatzeres.
Okay, then the thing that she was talking about the trash, according to some people want to be more machmir, but my apartment, I live on the 12th floor.
Shoot.
So my 12th floor has Jews and non-Jews. But the point is that's kind of like private because they don't even allow cameras to sit in there for safety reasons, in case someone's stealing. So they don't. It's private. So I can take the trash to the chute, but to take trash to the basement, that's going through the whole building, and I don't live on the other floors or the basement, so I shouldn't take the trash down there.
It doesn't make a difference. What you're saying doesn't make a difference. I want to say something. First of all, number one is if there's rules that separate the floors, that would be like almost like Chatzeiros, courtyards, a whole bunch of courtyards together, right? If
So
let's say,
you're saying I shouldn't do it? Maybe I misinterpreted.
I'm saying you can because the very fact that you're able to carry in the whole building means that either we're being soymach on an Erev Chatzeiros. There's no question whoever's you're in Brooklyn, Flatbush, wherever that your Erev is, the Rabbanim over there must be making the Erev Chatzeros in a way that's permissible for not just for you to carry in the street, but also for you to carry in between your chatzer. Again, at the end of the day, I think the law is that when you have courtyards and you have an alley, so then the alley becomes the primary space that you're joining, and that's probably the basis of what they're doing. They're using.
Okay, so let me say what he said about. Okay, we have a pool. I'm not getting in. I don't want to get anywhere near that women swim in there, and that some Jews only go down there on Shabbos to sit in kibbutz and read books, and some go to swim. That's not my issue. There's a gate around it. So I asked him, am I allowed to carry like a chair down there so I could sit? Because you could buy a more comfortable chair. And he said the Eiruv covers that area, so there's no problem of carrying.
Okay, again, that would have to be that if the Erev that is made to allow you to carry is also including the Eiruv Chatzeiros. That's what I'm saying. And it could be the reason. I think the halacha is, according to Rambam, if I'm not mistaken, that once you have the alleyway, the shituf becomes the primary Eiruv Chatzeiros, and the Eiruv Chatzeiros is secondary. I think it's only the chumrah. You would have to make a second Erev Chatzeros if you have a shituf of the alleyways, and the shituf of the alleyways would be pretty much because once you make an Erev around the whole flatbush, then that's like one big like one big courtyard or a whole bunch of courtyards going into alleyways, and then whoever's in charge of the Erev also has to make the Erev Chatzeros or the shituf that kind of covers this King Solomon's concern, and therefore we don't find that people are making Erev Chatzeros in buildings. The reason why the question they had in Crown Heights is because that building in Crown Heights is either this question was before they had the Erev in Crown Heights, or according to the Rabbanim who don't accept the Erev in Crown Heights. And then this apartment building has no other Erev besides their Erev Chatzeros, and it's fact that it's a private domain because it's a closed space. But the reason why you're able to carry, and I'm trying to find, I want to have a proper conversation with someone, I just didn't have a chance yet to make sure that I get clearly that what is the basis that we're using. It's either the shittif or, because again, in Yerushalayim, I have not seen that people are making Erev Chatzeros in apartment buildings, which means
Okay, so what yours?
they're relying on the Rabbanut that is making the Erev, besides the Erev, also the Erev Chatzeros or the shituf that permits the carrying of the vessels within the private domain itself.
So I'm just going to say one thing about what you're saying. So you gave a bunch of reasons why and why not. And because of that, that's why in Flatbush, half the people don't believe in it because of all the questions that you bring up.
No, that's a no. There's another question. The reason why they don't believe in it is because they don't believe you could privatize Flatbush. So then
Yeah, that's two.
there's no private domain, and then each courtyard needs this. Then, if there's no private domain, then there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros because let's say, for instance, right? You have this space. If this space is not a space, and you only have a whole bunch of these spaces, so then there's no. You could have food from today till tomorrow. The food only helps the space, but there is no space like this. There is no courtyard. There's no huge courtyard called Flatbush.
Oh,
There's therefore, if the rabbis of Flatbush made Eiruv Chatzeiros, it has nothing to do with me. Therefore, the building in Karnites, I had a question, right? Because there is no Erev in Karnites that they're accepting. So therefore, how are we counting between the apartment buildings? How am I taking my dishes, my garbage outside? There has to be an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So therefore, the building has to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros. And his question was, what happens if I lock the door? If I'm not there for Shabbos, do I have to leave a key? That's all. But the basis of what your rabbi is saying, you're allowed to carry your chair, is not just because there's an Erev, but there has to be an Eiruv Chatzeiros that covers also the fact that there's an Erev. Because to take things out of your house that are house things, if you leave your chair outside your door, then it would be different. Let's say you keep your chair outside your door. So then you're keeping it something that's kept in the courtyard. And again, if the streets, if the floors in your building have different access, that means that whoever's on floor one shouldn't be on floor two, vice versa. It's kind of each floor has their own privacy. That Mr. Rabbi kind of also is like a separate chatzeros. Yes, Rebecca.
I'm sure you probably said this already, but where, like, theoretically, if you needed an Eiruv Chatzeiros in an apartment building, would you keep it in someone's apartment, or would you keep it in the private? I mean, in the communal space somewhere. Like, where would you keep it?
Again, there's the shituf is different. The shituf usually was kept, if you remember the picture we showed over here. So the picture shows the ChatGPT. You have to give them a little bit more credit than people give them. You see this little house at the end. A little bit of the idea of the house at the end, I think, is that it's like this is like the guards gate. Like if you go to a private domain in a gated area, let's say a golf course, they'll have like a little guards room, right? A guard space that sits by the door and lets people opens the gate, right? Usually you would put the shituf over there in an alleyway, but in a building, then you could have it in an apartment in one person's house, but people have to have access to the house. That was the question in Karnites. So he's saying you don't have to be there the whole Shabbos, and you don't even have to be there ben Hashmoshes. But the best is that that people know. The idea is that people that in theory what we're creating in theory is a place that people could come eat. So in theory they could, as long as you're in the house and I can knock on the door and say, "Oh, I'd like to eat from the Eiruv Chatzeiros. I'd like to have a piece of matzah." You don't have to eat from the matzah, but you're kind of creating as if you're going to be eating a meal together or have access to that food. So as long as if an Eiruv Chatzeiros, again, all the Eiruvs, Eiruv Tchum Moso, if you're having a space that you don't have access to it, then it defeats the purpose. So if it's in a locked apartment that no one has access to, it's a problem. He's saying it seems like from the answer is that if it's always open, it's not b'diavad, you should make another Eiruv Chatzeiros without a bracha because it's always there. You have to learn the laws. We only saw the answer, we didn't see all the details. But
one thing in New York, you would never leave your door unlocked. Someone will come in.
I know,
And also, you wouldn't give someone access to your apartment either. So that's why I'm trying to understand. Like, could you leave it in somewhere in the communal space?
No, it'd have to be in a protected communal space. But it's better. No, it's best to keep it in an apartment. Just that if someone knocked on your door, you wouldn't open the door for a neighbor. You would open the door and let them in if they wanted to.
I wouldn't let them eat in my apartment while I'm not here.
Okay, I know that it's not. We're not talking about exactly someone's making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're talking about like some sort of communal. You know what's nice about the Eiruv Chatzeiros? I know it's not something that's very. I don't want to say anything negative about New York, but not necessarily known as people that people like to have their own privacy mixed out of my business. But the whole point of an Eiruv Chatzeiros is kind of to unite people.
I got it. Okay.
Let me just say
another. Yeah, go.
I just want to end this with one thing, then ask your question. My thing is that in Crown Heights, so I did this once. One of my friends said, you on Sukkot, you hop from sukkahs to sukkahs to sukkahs. Everyone leaves bread and wine, and you see how many sukkahs you make a blessing in.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Laila Tov, we'll have to finish this halacha. We're going to go through this slowly because it's very practical and very applicable. So we'll try to make sure we get it as we're as knowledgeable as we can. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.